October 1988, Manhattan's Plaza Hotel. Maintenance workers in dusty coveralls methodically stripped brass fixtures from mahogany walls in the Oak Room, fixtures that had remained untouched since the hotel's grand opening in 1907. If you want more answers, subscribe and like this video. 81 years of accumulated history dismantled in mere hours because the property's new owner demanded immediate modernization and maximum monetization. America's most iconic hotel wasn't undergoing careful restoration. It was being systematically gutted for cash by someone who'd borrowed nearly $500 million to acquire it. Two women didn't perish here, but something else did. The essence of an institution. The organizational culture painstakingly built by successive generations of dedicated staff and loyal guests. The irreplaceable character that elevated the Plaza far beyond just another luxury property. To comprehend how America's most cherished hotel transformed into a battleground for unchecked ego and relentless greed, we must return to when the Plaza existed merely as an ambitious vision in one man's imagination, a man determined to construct something unprecedented in the world. The Plaza Hotel occupies the prestigious corner where Fifth Avenue meets Central Park South. 18 stories of elegant French Renaissance limestone architecture face what may be Manhattan's most valuable real estate. For more than 100 years, this particular address has signified something very specific: prosperity, sophistication, the unmistakable declaration that one has achieved success. Step through those perpetually revolving doors, and you enter a carefully constructed world designed to make ordinary existence feel wonderfully distant. The imported marble floors echo with footfalls of virtually everyone who mattered throughout American history. The elaborate chandeliers cast flattering light even upon the most travel-weary arrivals. This isn't merely accommodation. This is theater. The structure has appeared in more motion pictures than most working actors. Alfred Hitchcock filmed memorable scenes here for his classic thriller North by Northwest. The Plaza portrayed itself in both film versions of The Great Gatsby. Home Alone 2 transformed the ornate lobby into a playground for a resourceful child wielding a stolen credit card. Crocodile Dundee wandered these corridors, bewildered by American opulence. Nearly every romantic comedy set in New York eventually gravitates toward the Plaza's doors. When filmmakers require visual shorthand for wealth and refinement, they point cameras at this facade. The building has evolved into a recurring character in America's ongoing narrative about itself. The statistics reveal part of the story. When the current Plaza opened on October 1, 1907, construction had consumed $12.5 million, roughly $400 million in contemporary dollars. The original architectural plans included 800 guest rooms distributed across 19 floors. The building contained 500 private bathrooms during an era when most hotels offered shared facilities at the end of the hallway. This represented revolutionary luxury. Indoor plumbing for every single guest, telephones in every room, a pneumatic tube system that transmitted messages between floors faster than any bellhop could possibly run. The craftsmanship equaled the technology. The lobby required sufficient marble to cover an entire city block. Workers installed 1,650 crystal chandeliers throughout the structure. The Palm Court featured a magnificent stained glass ceiling that transformed afternoon tea into something approaching transcendent experience. The Oak Room's elaborate paneling came from forests that no longer exist. The oak bar's detailed murals depicted scenes of old New York already vanishing when the paint was still wet. Every single detail proclaimed permanence. This edifice was constructed to outlast its creators. But statistics miss what made the Plaza matter. This wasn't just an expensive hotel. It was the place where American wealth performed for itself and the world. The guest registers read like a history of the 20th century, written in signatures. Mark Twain stayed here in the Plaza's early years. He held court in the lobby, dispensing wit to anyone who approached. F. Scott Fitzgerald checked in repeatedly during the 1920s. He was eventually banned for swimming drunk in the Pulitzer Fountain outside. The incident became legend. Fitzgerald didn't seem to mind. The Beatles occupied an entire floor in February 1964. Fans surrounded the building for days. Police struggled to maintain order. The band held press conferences in suites that had hosted royalty. Frank Lloyd Wright lived at the Plaza for years while designing the Guggenheim Museum. He complained constantly about the room rates while refusing to leave. Truman Capote hosted his legendary black and white ball in the Grand Ballroom in 1966. The guest list included everyone from Frank Sinatra to the Kansas couple, who had inspired in cold blood. The party cost a fortune and achieved exactly what Capote intended. It announced that the Plaza remained the center of American social life. Every president from Theodore Roosevelt onward walked through those doors at some point. Foreign heads of state considered the Plaza the only acceptable address in New York. The hotel hosted treaty negotiations, secret meetings, and diplomatic receptions that shaped world events. Decisions made in these suites affected millions of people who would never see the inside of the building. Power concentrated here because powerful people expected to find each other here. The Plaza also housed permanent residents. This distinguished it from ordinary hotels. Wealthy widows moved in after their husbands died, preferring hotel service to maintaining vast apartments alone. Retired industrialists took suites and never left. Eccentric heiresses chose the Plaza over family mansions because staff handled every inconvenience. Some families occupied the same suites for generations, passing them down like inherited property. Children grew up in these rooms. They learned to walk in hallways designed for visiting dignitaries. These permanent residents weren't guests. They were neighbors. They ate breakfast together in the palm court. They recognized each other's voices in the elevators. They knew the doormen by name. The doormen knew their children and eventually their grandchildren. This created something rare in New York City, a community built on continuity rather than transaction. The hotel functioned as a village inside a building. Residents looked out for each other. Staff became extended family. The longest-serving employees had watched generations grow up within these walls. Kay Thompson understood this when she created Eloise. The children's book about a girl who lives at the Plaza captured something true. The hotel really did contain a secret world. Behind the public grandeur existed a private community with its own rules and rhythms. Eloise ran through halls that real children had run through for decades. She ordered room service because real residents ordered room service daily. The book became beloved because it revealed what permanent guests already knew. Living at the Plaza meant belonging to something. For most of its history, the hotel changed hands rarely. The original developers held it for decades. When ownership did transfer, buyers understood they were purchasing an institution, not just real estate, not just a famous name. They were acquiring responsibility for something that mattered to people beyond the transaction. New owners maintained standards because the staff expected standards. They preserved traditions because guests returned expecting traditions. They recognized that the Plaza's value came from intangible things no appraiser could quantify. Then the ownership carousel began spinning faster. Conrad Hilton bought the Plaza in 1943. He approached the acquisition as a business optimization problem. Efficiency increased, character decreased. Westin Hotels acquired the property later. Each corporate transition brought subtle changes, cost reductions disguised as modernization. Staff cuts justified by new management systems. Small compromises that individually seemed reasonable but collectively eroded something essential. The permanent residents noticed first. Staff turnover accelerated. Familiar faces disappeared without explanation. New employees didn't know the residents' names or preferences. The hotel started feeling less like a home and more like a business that happened to contain their apartments. Some residents complained. Others simply accepted the changes as inevitable. A few began looking for alternatives, though leaving the Plaza meant abandoning decades of accumulated life. By the 1980s, the Plaza had become a trophy property, the most famous hotel in America, available to whoever could write the largest check. This attracted a new type of buyer. Developers who saw potential in the land more than the building, financiers who understood the brand value but not the institutional responsibility. The building occupied some of Manhattan's most valuable real estate. Those 800 guest rooms could become luxury condominiums worth tens of millions each. The apartments housing permanent residents could be converted and sold for enormous profit. The math was tempting. Gut the operations, keep the facade, extract maximum value. In 1986, the Plaza received crucial protection. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission designated key interior spaces as landmarks. The Palm Court with its famous ceiling, the Oak Room and Oak Bar with their irreplaceable woodwork, the Grand Ballroom where Capote had thrown his legendary party. These spaces couldn't be altered without commission approval. The designation recognized what preservationists had argued for years. The Plaza's significance extended beyond its famous limestone exterior. The interior spaces represented craftsmanship that could never be replicated. But landmark status had limits. It protected physical spaces from demolition or drastic alteration. It couldn't protect culture. It couldn't prevent new owners from firing longtime staff. It couldn't stop someone from eliminating the services that made permanent residents feel at home. It couldn't preserve the intangible community that had developed over decades. A developer could hollow out everything that made the plaza more than just a beautiful building while technically complying with landmark regulations. The hotel went up for sale in 1988. Multiple buyers expressed interest. The asking price exceeded $400 million for the building and the business. For that sum, a buyer would acquire not just real estate, but a piece of American mythology. The question was whether any buyer would understand what they were actually purchasing, whether anyone would protect what couldn't appear on a balance sheet, whether the plaza would find an owner who loved it or merely wanted to own it. The battles over the plaza would involve some of America's most notorious figures. Real estate developers with enormous ambitions and larger debts, billionaires from multiple continents seeking trophy properties, foreign sovereign wealth funds treating American landmarks as investment vehicles. Each would make promises about restoration and preservation. Few would keep them. The hotel that seemed eternal was about to discover how quickly institutions can be destroyed by people who see only dollar signs. But before the celebrities and scandals, before the bankruptcies and lawsuits, there was a man with a vision. His name was Harry Black. And in 1905, he decided to tear down the old plaza and build something the world had never seen. Harry S. Black was not a hotelier. He was a deal maker. Born in 1863 in Ontario, Canada, he came to America as a young man seeking opportunity. He found it in construction, not in laying bricks, but in financing buildings. By the 1890s, Black had risen to lead the George A. Fuller Company, one of America's largest construction firms. Fuller built skyscrapers. They pioneered techniques that made tall buildings possible. Black understood that the real money wasn't in construction itself. The real money was in controlling the land beneath the buildings. In 1901, Black engineered a merger that created U.S. Realty and Construction Company. The new corporation controlled Fuller Construction and vast Manhattan real estate holdings. Black became president of the combined enterprise. He was 38 years old and already one of the most powerful men in New York real estate. His ambition was limitless. He wanted to build monuments that would outlast him. The original Plaza Hotel had opened in 1890 at the corner of 5th Avenue and 59th Street. It was successful but unremarkable. An 8-story brick building that looked dated almost immediately. By 1905, the neighborhood had transformed around it. Central Park had matured into the city's great green escape. 5th Avenue was becoming the most prestigious address in America. The old plaza no longer matched its surroundings. Black saw opportunity where others saw an adequate hotel. He convinced investors to demolish the existing building and construct something unprecedented. Not just a larger hotel, the largest hotel, the most luxurious hotel, a building that would define what American hospitality could become. Black assembled financing of $12.5 million. In 1905, this was an extraordinary sum. It signaled that the new plaza would spare no expense. For architect, Black chose Henry Janeway Hardenberg. The selection was deliberate. Hardenberg had already designed two of America's most famous buildings. The Dakota Apartment on Central Park West, completed in 1884. The original Waldorf Astoria Hotel on 5th Avenue, completed in stages between 1893 and 1897. He understood how to design buildings that announced their importance from blocks away. He knew how to create spaces that made wealthy people feel appropriately celebrated. Hardenberg proposed a French Renaissance chateau design, 19 stories of limestone and brick rising above the corner of 5th Avenue and Central Park South. The style referenced European aristocracy without copying it directly. This was American wealth creating its own traditions. The building would feature a distinctive green copper roof visible from throughout the southern end of Central Park. Twin towers would frame the main facade. The entrance would open onto a grand lobby designed to humble visitors with its scale. Construction began in 1905 and proceeded rapidly. The site posed challenges. Building on a corner lot meant coordinating two street frontages. The desired height required innovative structural engineering. Workers drove foundation pilings deep into Manhattan bedrock. The steel skeleton rose floor by floor through 1906. By early 1907, the exterior was largely complete. Interior finishing consumed the remaining months. The craftsmanship inside matched the ambition outside. Hardenberg specified materials from around the world: Italian marble for the floors and columns, crystal from Europe for the chandeliers, rare woods for the paneling in public rooms. The palm court received special attention. This space would serve afternoon tea beneath a vaulted ceiling of stained glass. The light filtering through that glass would become famous. Photographers would seek it for decades. The Oak Room and Oak Bar occupied prominent ground floor locations. Hardenberg designed them as masculine retreats: dark wood paneling, murals depicting outdoor scenes, heavy furniture meant for serious men conducting serious business. Women would not be permitted in these spaces for decades. The segregation reflected the era's assumptions. It would eventually embarrass the hotel. But in 1907, it seemed natural, even refined. Guest rooms incorporated technology that amazed visitors. Every room had its own telephone connected to a central switchboard. Every room had its own bathroom with hot and cold running water. A pneumatic tube system allowed messages to travel between floors almost instantly. Central heating kept the entire building comfortable regardless of weather. These features seem ordinary now. In 1907, they represented the cutting edge of hospitality. The Plaza opened on October 1st, 1907. New York society treated the event as a major occasion. The New York Times devoted extensive coverage. The hotel was fully booked before the doors opened. Waiting lists formed immediately for future reservations. Suites that were expected to rent by the week attracted tenants who wanted them by the year. Black had succeeded beyond reasonable expectation. He'd built not just a hotel, but a destination. The Plaza immediately became the address for visiting dignitaries and American aristocrats alike. The building dominated its corner of Fifth Avenue. The green copper roof could be seen from throughout Midtown. The facade announced wealth and permanence with every carved detail. The financial returns matched the architectural triumph. The hotel generated strong revenue from its first full year. Room rates far exceeded competitors. The permanent residents provided steady income regardless of seasonal fluctuations. Black's investment was paying off handsomely, but Black's personal story would take darker turns. His ambition extended beyond the Plaza. He continued expanding U.S. Realty's holdings through the 1910s and 1920s. When the stock market crashed in 1929, Black's empire collapsed with it. Properties that had seemed valuable became worthless. Debts that had seemed manageable became crushing. On July 19, 1930, Harry Black died by suicide in his Long Island home. He was 67 years old. The man who built the Plaza never recovered from losing his fortune. The pattern would repeat. Builders who created monuments often didn't live to enjoy them. The Plaza would outlast Harry Black and every subsequent owner. The chandeliers would keep burning while empires rose and fell around them. The building didn't care who held the deed. It just survived. Hardenberg lived longer than Black, but saw his reputation fade. Architectural tastes shifted after World War I. The ornate styles he'd mastered fell out of fashion. Modernism demanded simplicity. Hardenberg's elaborate facades seemed old-fashioned to younger architects. He died in 1918, just 11 years after the Plaza opened. His obituaries praised the building he designed. They called it his masterpiece. The assessment is held for over a century. The Plaza that Black and Hardenberg created in 1907 was designed to impress. It succeeded. But a hotel is not a house. It doesn't belong to one family generation after generation. It belongs to everyone who walks through its doors. It belongs to the guests who sleep in its beds and the staff who change those sheets. And ultimately, it belongs to whoever holds the deed. The story of who stayed at the Plaza is inseparable from the story of who owned it. Each owner left marks. Some preserved what they inherited. Others extracted what they could and moved on. The building absorbed every change and kept standing. It would need that resilience. The century ahead would test it repeatedly. Walking into the Plaza in 1920 was like entering a small European kingdom transplanted to Manhattan. The lobby announced importance before you spoke to anyone. Marble columns rose toward distant ceilings. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across floors polished to mirror shine. Bellhops in immaculate uniforms moved with military precision. The message was clear. You had arrived somewhere that mattered. The staff operated according to unwritten hierarchies. The concierge knew everything about everyone. He tracked preferences, allergies, and affairs with equal discretion. Head waiters commanded their dining rooms like generals. They remembered which guests preferred which tables. They knew who tipped generously and who didn't. This knowledge translated into service, calibrated to the guest's precise social position. Doormen stood outside through every season. Summer heat and winter blizzards treated identically. They recognized residents by footstep before faces came into view. They hailed cabs with gestures that seemed effortless but required years to perfect. A good Plaza doorman made arriving feel like a ceremony. Guests noticed when their usual doorman was absent. The consistency mattered. The permanent residents formed their own society within the hotel. Wealthy widows dominated this population. Women whose husbands had died, leaving fortunes too large to manage alone. Hotel living solved problems that maintaining private homes created. No need to hire servants, no worry about repairs, no loneliness in vast empty rooms. The Plaza staff handled everything while providing constant human contact. These residents occupied suites on the upper floors. Some decorated their spaces with personal furniture shipped from family estates. Others accepted the hotel's furnishings and added only photographs and books. Either way, they made these rooms home. Children were born in these suites. Elderly residents died in them. Decades passed within the same walls. The Palm Court served as the social center. Afternoon tea arrived precisely at 4 o'clock. Silver pots and delicate cups on white tablecloths beneath that famous stained glass ceiling. The light through the glass shifted with weather and season. Rainy afternoons cast different colors than sunny ones. Regulars noticed these changes and commented on them. The Palm Court created its own world with its own rhythms. Women met there to exchange information that couldn't be shared elsewhere. Engagements were announced over tea before appearing in newspapers. Divorces were whispered about while spreading marmalade. Business deals were discussed in language coded to exclude eavesdroppers. The Palm Court functioned as an intelligence exchange where reputation was the currency. The Oak Room operated by different rules. This was masculine territory. Dark paneling absorbed sound and light equally. Men conducted business over heavy meals and stronger drinks. The room didn't admit women until 1969. For 6 decades, it remained a male sanctuary, where deals were made without feminine distraction. The exclusion seems absurd now. Then it seemed natural. The Oak Bar next door followed similar policies. Lawyers and bankers gathered after market close. They dissected the day's events in leather chairs designed to encourage long conversations. Murals on the walls depicted pastoral scenes that contrasted sharply with the urban intensity of the conversations below. Men who spent their days in office towers appreciated these painted forests and fields. The Persian Room offered evening entertainment, a nightclub within the hotel where society came to dance and be seen. Eartha Kitt performed there during her rise to fame. Hildegard drew crowds who dressed for the occasion. The room featured a stage and dance floor surrounded by tables where guests ordered champagne and pretended not to watch each other. Seeing and being seen was the entire point. The Grand Ballroom hosted events that made social pages across the country. Debutante balls introduced young women to society. Charity galas raised millions for approved causes. Corporate celebrations rewarded executives with evenings of orchestrated elegance. The room could accommodate over 1,000 guests. Its chandeliers alone required a full-time maintenance crew. Truman Capote understood the Plaza's social power when he chose it for his black and white ball in November 1966. The guest list became front-page news weeks before the event. 500 people received invitations to what newspapers called the Party of the Century. Capote mixed celebrities with Kansas farmers. He sat Frank Sinatra next to women who'd never heard of him. The evening demonstrated that whoever controlled the Plaza's ballroom controlled New York society. The hotel attracted guests who defined their eras. F. Scott Fitzgerald stayed repeatedly during the 1920s. He treated the Plaza as his personal stage. One evening, he stripped down and dove into the Pulitzer fountain outside. Management banned him afterward. Fitzgerald seemed delighted by the scandal. The incident became part of his legend. The Beatles arrived in February 1964 and transformed the hotel into a media circus. Fans surrounded the building for days. Police struggled to maintain order. The band held press conferences in suites that normally housed dignified businessmen. Teenage screams echoed through halls designed for whispered conversation. The Plaza had never experienced anything like it. The staff adapted with characteristic professionalism. Frank Lloyd Wright lived at the Plaza for years while designing the Guggenheim Museum. He complained constantly about noise and service and rates. He threatened to leave repeatedly. He never did. The hotel tolerated his eccentricities because his presence brought prestige. Famous architects staying at your hotel announced that your hotel mattered to people who cared about beauty. Guests arrived from every corner of power. Foreign heads of state considered the Plaza the only acceptable New York address. Presidents from both parties attended events in the ballroom. Corporate titans negotiated mergers over dinner. The hotel functioned as neutral territory where rivals could meet without surrendering advantage. The Plaza's reputation guaranteed discretion. The staff who made this world function rarely received public recognition. Housekeepers who changed sheets for decades, elevator operators who learned every resident's floor without being told, kitchen workers who prepared thousands of meals to exacting standards. These employees passed skills to younger workers in informal apprenticeships. The knowledge accumulated across generations. Some staff families worked at the Plaza for multiple generations. Sons followed fathers into service positions. Daughters joined mothers in housekeeping departments. The hotel became family business for people who never held ownership stakes. Their pride was real. They maintained standards even when management changed or budgets tightened. Kay Thompson captured something essential when she created Eloise in 1955. Her children's book depicted a girl who lived at the Plaza and treated it as her personal playground. Eloise ran through halls that adults walked. She knew secret passages and hidden rooms. She formed relationships with staff who indulged her adventures. The book sold millions of copies and introduced the hotel to children who would grow up dreaming of staying there. Eloise worked because it described something true. The Plaza really did contain secret worlds. Behind the public grandeur existed private communities. The permanent residents knew passageways that tourists never discovered. Staff used service corridors invisible to guests. Multiple realities coexisted within the same building. The hotel accommodated them all. For half a century, the Plaza seemed eternal. The routines felt permanent, the standards never wavered. Guests returned year after year and found the same doormen greeting them. The same waiters remembered their preferences. The same light filtered through the palm court ceiling. This consistency created something rare, a place where time seemed to move differently, where the chaos of the outside world couldn't penetrate. But hotels are businesses. They have balance sheets and shareholders and quarterly reports. They require constant investment just to maintain existing standards. And in the 1970s, the Plaza's numbers started telling a different story. The Plaza changed hands for the first time in 1943. Conrad Hilton purchased the hotel as part of his aggressive expansion across America. He'd built his fortune buying distressed properties during the Depression. The Plaza wasn't distressed, it was prestigious. Hilton wanted the name more than the building. Hilton approached the Plaza as an efficiency problem. His chain operated on standardized systems designed to maximize profit. Every Hilton hotel used the same accounting methods, the same training programs, the same performance metrics. This worked well for roadside motor lodges. It fit awkwardly with an institution that had developed its own culture over 4 decades. The changes came gradually. Staff positions were consolidated. Departments that had operated independently now reported through corporate hierarchies. Long-serving employees who remembered the original ways found their expertise undervalued. The new management wanted consistency with other Hilton properties. The Plaza's distinctiveness was a problem to be solved. Some traditions survived. The Palm Court still served afternoon tea. The Oak Room still excluded women. The permanent residents still occupied their suites, but the texture changed. Small economies accumulated. Slightly cheaper supplies, slightly less elaborate service, slightly fewer staff members covering slightly more responsibilities. Each individual compromise seemed minor. Together, they shifted something fundamental. Hilton sold the Plaza in 1953 to a real estate investor named A.M. Sonnabend. The price was $15 million. Sonnabend understood hotels but approached them as properties rather than institutions. His company managed the Plaza competently without inspiring devotion. The building continued functioning. The standards held. Nothing got dramatically better or worse. The 1970s brought crisis to New York City. Municipal bankruptcy loomed. Crime rates spiked. Wealthy residents fled to suburbs. Companies relocated headquarters to other states. The city that had seemed like the center of the world suddenly seemed like a dangerous backwater. Tourism declined sharply. Business travel shifted elsewhere. The Plaza felt these pressures acutely. Occupancy rates dropped. The permanent residents aged without replacement. Young, wealthy families didn't want to raise children in a city that felt unsafe. They chose Connecticut or Westchester instead. The suites that had housed multiple generations of families started emptying as elderly residents died. Maintenance costs never declined regardless of revenue. The building required constant attention. Pipes corroded, electrical systems needed updating. The limestone facade weathered and required repair. The famous chandeliers demanded specialized cleaning. Running an 80-year-old building cost substantially more than running a modern one. Every year brought new expenses that couldn't be avoided. Westin Hotels acquired the Plaza in 1975. Another corporate owner, another set of standardized procedures. Westin had less history than Hilton, but similar approaches. Efficiency mattered. Brand consistency mattered. The Plaza's unique character was an asset in marketing materials and a complication in operations. The permanent residents watched these transitions with growing unease. Each new owner brought new rules, new restrictions on what residents could do in spaces they'd occupied for decades. New staff members who didn't know family histories. New managers who viewed longtime residents as obstacles rather than community members. Some residents had legal protections. New York's rent stabilization laws applied to certain long-term tenants. These residents couldn't be easily displaced. Their rents couldn't be raised dramatically. They had rights that new owners found inconvenient. The tension between protected tenants and profit-seeking owners would intensify over the following decades. In 1969, the Oak Room finally admitted women after a lawsuit. The policy that had seemed natural for 6 decades suddenly seemed discriminatory. A group called the National Organization for Women targeted the Plaza specifically. They staged protests. They filed complaints. The hotel eventually surrendered. The Oak Room opened to women. Some male patrons grumbled. Most adapted quickly. The change revealed something important. Traditions that felt permanent could shift quickly when pressure mounted. What seemed like eternal customs were actually choices. Choices that could be reconsidered when circumstances changed. This applied to more than gender policies. It applied to the entire structure of how the Plaza operated. The building received crucial protection in 1986. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission designated the Plaza's exterior as a landmark. This meant the facade couldn't be altered without commission approval. No one could strip the limestone. No one could replace the distinctive windows. The building's appearance was legally protected against owners who might prefer cheaper alternatives. The interior spaces received similar protection in 1986. The Palm Court, the Oak Room, the Grand Ballroom, the Terrace Room. These spaces were designated interior landmarks. Their architectural features couldn't be removed or significantly altered. The stained glass ceiling, the oak paneling, the decorative plasterwork, all protected by law. Landmark designation gave preservationists legal standing to challenge proposed changes. It created a process where experts could review plans before execution. It established that the Plaza belonged to the public in some meaningful sense, regardless of who held the deed. The building's significance extended beyond its commercial function. But landmark laws had limits. They protected physical spaces from destruction. They couldn't mandate maintenance. They couldn't require owners to invest in preservation. They couldn't prevent neglect. An owner who wanted to extract maximum value while spending minimum money could let protected spaces deteriorate slowly. The law protected against dramatic destruction. It offered less defense against gradual decay. The laws also couldn't protect intangible things, the culture that made the Plaza special. The staff knowledge accumulated across generations, the community feeling among permanent residents, the service standards that distinguished the hotel from competitors. None of this received legal protection. Owners could gut these things entirely while technically complying with landmark regulations. By the mid-1980s, the Plaza had become a trophy property. Its fame exceeded its financial performance. The hotel struggled to compete with newer luxury properties. Modern hotels offered amenities the Plaza couldn't match without major renovation. Business travelers increasingly preferred convenience to prestige. The permanent residents provided steady revenue, but couldn't sustain the entire operation. Real estate speculators recognized the situation. The building occupied one of Manhattan's most valuable corners. The land beneath the Plaza was worth enormous sums regardless of what happened to the hotel. The guest rooms could become condominiums. The public spaces could become retail. The entire operation could be restructured to extract maximum value from the location. The hotel went up for sale in 1988. Multiple parties expressed interest. The asking price exceeded $400 million. For that sum, a buyer would acquire the most famous hotel name in America. They would also acquire protected landmark spaces they couldn't easily alter. They would inherit permanent residence with legal rights. They would take responsibility for a building that required expensive maintenance. The plaza needed an owner who understood what they were buying, someone with resources to invest properly, someone who appreciated the institution beyond its balance sheet, someone willing to accept constraints that came with landmark designation and tenant protections, someone who would preserve what made the plaza matter. Instead, the plaza got Donald Trump. Donald Trump purchased the Plaza Hotel in March 1988 for $407.5 million. At the time, it was the highest price ever paid for a single hotel property. Trump held a press conference to announce the acquisition. He declared he would restore the plaza to its original grandeur. He promised to make it the greatest hotel in the world. The promises sounded magnificent. The reality would prove very different. The financing structure revealed the first warning signs. Trump borrowed almost the entire purchase price. He used junk bonds with interest rates exceeding 14%. The debt service alone would require enormous revenue just to break even. The numbers only worked if the hotel's income increased dramatically and immediately. Financial analysts questioned whether that was possible. Trump dismissed their concerns with characteristic confidence. He installed his wife Ivana as president of the plaza. Her salary was officially $1 per year plus all the dresses she could buy. The arrangement made good publicity. Ivana had managed other Trump properties. She would bring the same approach to the plaza. The hotel's longtime staff watched the new leadership arrive with justified apprehension. The changes began within weeks. Trump ordered immediate cost reductions. He viewed the plaza's staffing levels as excessive. Positions were eliminated. Departments were consolidated. Employees who had worked at the hotel for decades received termination notices. The institutional knowledge they carried walked out the door with them. The service reductions followed quickly. Amenities that guests expected disappeared or diminished. The famous attention to detail that distinguished the plaza from competitors became harder to maintain, with fewer staff covering more responsibilities. Long-term guests noticed immediately. First-time visitors had nothing to compare against. They saw luxury. Regulars saw decline. Trump announced plans to convert portions of the hotel into condominiums. The guest rooms on upper floors would become private apartments. Each unit would sell for millions. The conversions would generate enormous one-time revenue. They would also permanently reduce the hotel's room inventory. The plaza would become smaller as a hotel while Trump extracted capital. The permanent residents recognized the threat immediately. If hotel rooms became condominiums, their apartments might be next. Their rent-controlled leases protected them from eviction, but constant pressure could make life unbearable. New owners often made existing tenants uncomfortable until they left voluntarily. The residents organized to protect their rights. Legal battles erupted almost immediately. Tenants filed complaints about maintenance. They documented every building code violation. They challenged proposed changes through every available channel. Trump's representatives pushed back aggressively. The relationship between ownership and residents became openly hostile. The condominium conversions proceeded despite opposition. Construction crews moved through the building. Units were reconfigured and upgraded. Sales offices opened to wealthy buyers who wanted plaza addresses. Some units sold for over $10 million. The revenue helped service the crushing debt, but each sale meant fewer hotel rooms generating ongoing income. Ivana managed the daily operations with aggressive efficiency. Staff members later described an atmosphere of constant pressure. Nothing was ever good enough. Costs had to decrease further. Service standards were impossible to maintain with available resources. The gap between what ownership demanded and what employees could deliver grew wider constantly. The feud with Leona Helmsley added another layer of chaos. Helmsley owned the Park Lane Hotel directly across the street. The two properties competed for similar guests. Helmsley and Trump despised each other personally. Their conflict played out in tabloid headlines and legal filings. The spectacle distracted from the plaza's mounting operational problems. Helmsley was eventually convicted of tax evasion in 1989. Her famous declaration that only little people pay taxes became national news. The conviction removed one rival, but didn't solve Trump's fundamental problem. The plaza was drowning in debt, regardless of what happened across the street. By 1990, the hotel owed approximately $250 million to bondholders. The interest payments exceeded what the property could generate. Trump had loaded the plaza with unsustainable debt to finance his purchase. Now the mathematics were collapsing. No amount of cost-cutting could close the gap between revenue and obligations. The junk bond market itself was imploding. The leveraged buyout era that had made Trump's purchase possible was ending badly. Companies that had borrowed heavily to acquire assets were defaulting. Banks that had underwritten risky deals faced massive losses. The financial environment that had enabled Trump's plaza purchase no longer existed. Trump's other properties were failing simultaneously. His casinos in Atlantic City struggled with similar debt burdens. The Trump shuttle airline hemorrhaged money. His yacht and mansions required expensive maintenance while generating no income. The empire built on borrowed money was coming apart across multiple fronts. The plaza's employees watched the deterioration with helpless frustration. They understood what was happening. They saw the deferred maintenance accumulating. They knew which corners were being cut. They worried about their jobs with good reason. Many had spent their entire careers at the hotel. They had nowhere else to go. The permanent residents experienced the decline daily. Service calls went unanswered longer. Repairs took weeks instead of days. The staff who remained seemed exhausted and demoralized. The community feeling that had made Plaza living special disappeared. Residents who could afford to leave began considering alternatives. Some historic preservation advocates sounded alarms. The landmark designations protected the building's physical features, but neglect could damage protected elements. Water intrusion and deferred maintenance could destroy irreplaceable details. The law required owners to maintain designated features. Enforcement proved difficult when owners claimed financial hardship. Trump's public statements bore no relationship to internal reality. He continued declaring the plaza successful while his representatives negotiated with creditors. He announced expansion plans while cutting staff. He claimed personal wealth while his properties teetered toward bankruptcy. The disconnect between pronouncements and evidence was total. Former employees later described the management atmosphere as chaotic. Decisions came from the top without consultation. Expertise was ignored. Long-term thinking was impossible because short-term survival consumed all attention. The institutional culture that had developed over 80 years was being actively destroyed. The contrast with previous owners was stark. Earlier corporate owners had been impersonal. They had introduced bureaucratic inefficiencies, but they hadn't loaded the property with unsustainable debt. They hadn't stripped the hotel to service that debt. They hadn't created an atmosphere where survival required destroying what made the plaza valuable. Trump's approach to the plaza would prove typical of his business career. Acquire assets with borrowed money, extract value quickly, let the debt crush what remained, move on to the next deal while creditors fought over scraps. The pattern repeated with casinos, airlines, and countless other properties. The plaza was one of many casualties. By 1992, the situation was terminal. The plaza couldn't service its debt. Trump couldn't inject additional capital. The bondholders who had financed the purchase wanted their money back. Something had to give. The question was what Trump would sacrifice and what he would keep. The answer revealed his priorities clearly. Trump would protect his personal reputation and residual ownership stake. He would let the bondholders absorb losses. He would surrender operational control while maintaining the Trump Association. The plaza would survive in diminished form. The people who had lent him money would pay for his miscalculation. In November 1992, Donald Trump surrendered control of the Plaza Hotel to his creditors. The restructuring agreement told the story of his failure in precise numbers. Bondholders who had financed his purchase received 49% ownership. Trump kept 49% but lost management authority. Citibank and other lenders took the remaining stake. Trump's grand promises had collapsed into bankruptcy paperwork. The debt restructuring erased hundreds of millions in obligations. Bondholders who had expected full repayment received equity in a troubled property instead. Their original investments were worth a fraction of face value. The people who had lent Trump money paid for his miscalculation. This pattern would repeat throughout his business career. Borrow heavily, fail spectacularly, let creditors absorb losses. The 4 years of Trump's active management left visible damage. Deferred maintenance had accumulated throughout the building. Systems that required regular attention had been neglected. The famous fixtures showed wear that proper care would have prevented. Staff who knew how to maintain these irreplaceable elements had been fired. Their expertise walked out with them. The workforce had been gutted systematically. Positions eliminated during cost-cutting drives were never restored. Remaining employees covered responsibilities formerly divided among multiple people. Service quality suffered inevitably. The institutional memory that distinguished the plaza from competitors had been deliberately destroyed. The permanent residents had experienced years of hostile management. Their complaints had been ignored or met with legal threats. Building services they depended upon had deteriorated. Some residents had surrendered and moved out. Others remained behind barricades of rent stabilization protections. The community feeling that had defined Plaza residential life no longer existed. The condominium conversions had permanently altered the building's character. Hotel rooms that had served travelers for 80 years were now private apartments. The new owners had no connection to the plaza's traditions. They wanted Manhattan addresses and tax advantages. They didn't care about afternoon tea in the Palm Court or the history of the Oak Room. The conversion reduced the hotel's room inventory dramatically. 800 rooms became fewer than 500. The plaza was now primarily a condominium building with a hotel component. This inversion of purpose contradicted everything Harry Black had envisioned. He built a great hotel. Trump converted it into an apartment building with a famous lobby. Financial analysts assessed the damage in their reports. The property's competitive position had declined significantly. Newer luxury hotels offered amenities the plaza couldn't match. Business travelers increasingly chose modern properties with contemporary technology. The plaza's fame remained. Its operational excellence had been compromised. Preservationists documented what had been lost and what survived. The landmark protected spaces remained largely intact. The Palm Court stained glass ceiling still filtered afternoon light. The Oak Room's paneling hadn't been removed. The grand ballroom's architectural features were preserved. The law had protected the bones of the building, but the law couldn't protect intangible losses. The service culture built across generations. The staff relationships that made permanent residents feel at home. The accumulated expertise that distinguished the plaza from any other hotel. The sense that staying at the plaza meant something beyond comfortable beds and convenient location. All of this had been damaged or destroyed. The remaining staff struggled to maintain standards with inadequate resources. New management brought new approaches but couldn't restore what had been lost. Training programs could teach procedures. They couldn't transfer institutional wisdom that develops only through decades of practice. The plaza functioned as a hotel. It no longer functioned as the plaza had. Former employees shared their experiences with journalists. They described an atmosphere of fear and chaos during the Trump years. They recalled the confusion when longtime colleagues disappeared overnight. They remembered the frustration of watching their workplace deteriorate while ownership claimed success. Their testimonies painted a portrait of institutional destruction. The permanent residents who remained told similar stories. They described years of combat with management over basic services. They recalled threatening letters and legal harassment. They remembered neighbors who gave up and moved away. Those who stayed felt like survivors of a siege. They had endured, but the community they defended had been irreparably changed. The broader context made the plaza's troubles seem almost inevitable. The late 1980s real estate bubble had encouraged reckless speculation. Easy credit enabled acquisitions that made no economic sense. The plaza was one casualty among many. Hotels, office buildings, and shopping centers across America suffered similar fates. But the plaza's fame made its decline particularly visible. Trump emerged from the bankruptcy with his reputation somehow intact. He had failed catastrophically. He had cost his creditors hundreds of millions of dollars. He had damaged an American landmark, yet he retained his celebrity status and his minority ownership stake. The ability to fail upward would become his defining characteristic. The plaza entered 1993 under new management with old problems. The debt was restructured, but the building still required investment. The staff was depleted and demoralized. The permanent residents were traumatized. The hotel's reputation had suffered years of damage. Recovery would require resources and commitment. The new ownership structure struggled to provide either. Industry observers noted patterns that would repeat. Highly leveraged acquisitions of trophy properties. Operational changes that prioritized short-term cash extraction over long-term value. Staff reductions that destroyed institutional knowledge. Gradual deterioration masked by famous names and aggressive marketing. The plaza had demonstrated these dangers. Future buyers would ignore the lessons. The question facing the plaza after Trump was whether recovery was possible. Could a great hotel rebuild its culture after systematic destruction? Could staff expertise be reconstructed after years of neglect? Could permanent residents trust new ownership after experiencing such hostility? Could the plaza become again what it had been before 1988? The building still stood magnificent at Fifth Avenue and Central Park South. The chandeliers still sparkled. Tourists still photographed the facade. The famous address still attracted guests willing to pay premium rates. But something essential had been extracted during the Trump years. Whether it could ever be restored remained an open question. The ownership carousel would continue spinning. New buyers would emerge with new promises. Each would claim to understand the plaza's significance. Each would vow to preserve its heritage while achieving financial returns. The hotel would change hands repeatedly over the coming decades. It would survive, but survival and flourishing are different things. After Trump, the plaza entered an era of revolving ownership. Each new buyer arrived with promises about restoration and preservation. Each eventually sold to the next buyer. The hotel became an asset to be traded rather than an institution to be stewarded. The carousel spun faster with each rotation. CDL Hotels of Singapore acquired controlling interest in 1995. The purchase price was approximately $325 million. CDL was a subsidiary of Hong Leong Holdings, one of Singapore's largest property developers. They brought international capital and professional hotel management. The acquisition signaled that the plaza had become a global trophy property. CDL invested in restoration work. They addressed some deferred maintenance from the Trump years. They upgraded systems that had been neglected. The hotel began functioning more professionally. Staff morale improved somewhat, but the fundamental changes from the condominium conversions remained permanent. The plaza couldn't become what it had been before 1988. The partnership structure remained complicated. Trump still held his minority stake. CDL controlled operations, but couldn't make certain decisions without other stakeholders' agreement. The ownership fragmentation limited what any single party could accomplish. Major investments required consensus that proved difficult to achieve. Fairmont Hotels took over management in 1999. The Canadian chain brought expertise in operating luxury properties. Fairmont managed other prestigious hotels, including the Waldorf Astoria and the Savoy in London. They understood how to balance historic preservation with contemporary hospitality expectations. The plaza benefited from their professional approach. The 2004 sale transformed the property again. Elad Properties, an Israeli development company, acquired the plaza for $675 million. Elad announced plans for additional condominium conversions. The hotel component would shrink further. More guest rooms would become private apartments. The pattern established under Trump would continue under new ownership. Preservationists fought the proposed changes. They argued that further conversions would fundamentally alter the plaza's character. The hotel that had once contained 800 rooms would be reduced to fewer than 300. The landmark designations protected architectural features. They didn't prevent conversion of hotel rooms to residential use. The conversions proceeded despite objections. More floors became condominiums. Wealthy buyers paid extraordinary sums for plaza addresses. Individual units sold for $30 million or more. A penthouse triplex eventually sold for over $50 million. The plaza's famous name commanded premium prices regardless of what happened to the hotel. The remaining hotel rooms received renovation. Elad invested in upgrades designed to attract wealthy travelers. The rooms became larger and more luxurious. The price per night increased accordingly. The plaza positioned itself as an ultra-luxury destination for guests who could afford $1,000 nightly rates. The permanent residents continued their long struggle. Some remained protected by rent stabilization laws. They occupied apartments surrounded by units worth tens of millions. The contrast was surreal. Working-class families paying controlled rents lived adjacent to billionaires. The plaza contained multiple economic realities that rarely intersected. Legal battles over tenant rights continued for years. Some residents reached settlements and departed. Others held firm and stayed. Each departure reduced the community that had made plaza residential life distinctive. The hotel was winning the war of attrition against its longest-term inhabitants. The workforce experienced similar transformations. Union representation remained, but working conditions changed. The expectations of ultra-luxury service combined with cost pressures created constant tension. Staff turnover increased. The multi-generational employment patterns that had defined the plaza for decades disappeared entirely. In 2012, the ownership structure shifted again. Sahara India Pariwar, an Indian conglomerate, acquired a controlling stake for approximately $570 million. The purchase attracted scrutiny because Sahara's chairman faced legal troubles in India. Securities regulators questioned the company's financing practices. The cloud over Sahara's leadership complicated the Plaza situation. The Sahara acquisition demonstrated how far the Plaza had traveled from its origins. An American landmark was now controlled by an Indian conglomerate facing regulatory challenges on another continent. In 2012, the ownership structure shifted again. Sahara India Pariwar, an Indian conglomerate, acquired a controlling stake for approximately $570 million. The purchase attracted scrutiny because Sahara's chairman faced legal troubles in India. Securities regulators questioned the company's financing practices. The cloud over Sahara's leadership complicated the Plaza's situation. The Sahara acquisition demonstrated how far the Plaza had traveled from its origins. An American landmark was now controlled by an Indian conglomerate, facing regulatory challenges on another continent. The hotel's fate depended on legal proceedings in courts thousands of miles away. Global finance had made national heritage into international commodity. Sahara's troubles deepened over the following years. The chairman was jailed in India over securities violations. The company struggled to meet financial obligations. The Plaza became an asset to be liquidated rather than an institution to be maintained. The ownership chaos affected operations in ways guests might not see, but staff certainly experienced. Qatar Hospitality, the hotel investment arm of Qatar's sovereign wealth fund, acquired the Plaza in 2018. The purchase price was reportedly around $600 million. A Middle Eastern government now owned America's most famous hotel. The acquisition completed the Plaza's transformation into a global investment vehicle. Qatar brought substantial resources. Qatar's sovereign wealth fund managed hundreds of billions of dollars. The Plaza's financial requirements posed no challenge. The question was whether foreign government ownership would prioritize preservation or returns. Sovereign wealth funds existed to generate income for their nations. Historic preservation served different purposes. The pattern across decades was unmistakable. Each ownership transition brought new promises. Each delivered partial improvements and continued commodification. The Plaza survived but diminished with each transfer. The hotel that had once defined American luxury hospitality became increasingly indistinguishable from other ultra-luxury properties. Some preservation victories deserve recognition. The landmark protected spaces remained largely intact. The Palm Court still served afternoon tea beneath its famous ceiling. The Oak Room's paneling survived despite changing restaurant operators. The Grand Ballroom hosted events as it had for a century. The architectural heritage endured. Other losses proved permanent. The room count dropped from 800 to approximately 280. The permanent residential community essentially disappeared. The service culture that had developed across generations was gone. The staff knowledge accumulated since 1907 had been dissipated through repeated management changes. The preservation battles illustrated the limits of landmark law. Physical features could be protected through designation. Economic pressures could be regulated through zoning and tenant protections, but culture, expertise, and community couldn't be mandated into existence. These intangible things required consistent ownership, committed to preservation. The Plaza hadn't had that for decades. The hotel's current state reflects these accumulated changes. It functions as an ultra-luxury property charging premium rates. The famous spaces remain beautiful. The service meets contemporary expectations. Guests who never knew the earlier Plaza find their stay satisfactory. Those who remember the hotel before 1988 recognize what has been lost. The workforce today operates under very different conditions than their predecessors experienced. Corporate management systems have replaced informal institutional culture. Training programs standardize service rather than preserving distinctive traditions. The Plaza employs professional hospitality workers. It no longer cultivates Plaza people who spent careers within its walls. Labor disputes have marked recent years. Union workers have struck over wages and working conditions. The tensions reflect broader conflicts in the hospitality industry, but they also represent the Plaza's transformation from family-like institution to corporate workplace. The strikes are symptoms of deeper changes no contract negotiation can address. Walk into the Plaza today and you can still feel something. The lobby retains its scale and grandeur. Marble columns rise toward decorated ceilings. Crystal chandeliers scatter light across polished floors. The space announces importance as it has for over a century. First-time visitors experience the impact Harry Black intended when he commissioned this building in 1905. The Palm Court continues serving afternoon tea. Guests sit beneath the famous stained glass ceiling that has filtered light since 1907. The menu has evolved. The prices have increased dramatically. But the ritual remains recognizable. People still dress for the occasion. They still photograph themselves in this setting. The space functions as designed even if the surrounding context has transformed completely. The Oak Room has changed operators multiple times. Various restaurant groups have attempted to make the space profitable. The paneling remains. The architectural character survives, but the room no longer functions as the masculine sanctuary where deals were made for decades. It serves different purposes now. The continuity is physical rather than cultural. The guest experience meets contemporary luxury standards. The reduced room count allows for larger accommodations. Modern amenities have been installed throughout. The technology works. The service is professional. Guests who judge hotels by contemporary measures find the Plaza satisfactory. Those seeking connection to history find something more complicated. The permanent residential community has essentially vanished. A handful of rent-stabilized tenants remain in apartments surrounded by multi-million-dollar condominiums. The neighbors they knew for decades have died or departed. The staff who recognized them have been replaced repeatedly. They live in a building that contains their homes but no longer feels like their community. The condominiums that replaced hotel rooms house a different population entirely. Billionaires from around the world own units as investments or occasional residences. Some apartments sit empty for most of the year. The owners appear briefly, then vanish to other properties. They have no connection to Plaza history. They bought addresses, not membership in a community. Harry Black would recognize the building he created. The facade remains largely unchanged. The landmark protections preserved architectural features he specified. The green copper roof still marks the corner of Fifth Avenue and Central Park South. The physical monument survived everything that followed his death. But Black might not recognize what the building has become. He built a great hotel. He created a destination where American society gathered and performed. The Plaza he envisioned was alive with activity. Guests and residents and staff formed communities within its walls. That living institution has been hollowed out. The beautiful shell remains. Black's personal fate offers another irony. He built monuments across America. The Fuller Company constructed skyscrapers that transformed city skylines. His U.S. Realty Company controlled vast real estate holdings. He achieved extraordinary success by any measure. Then the crash of 1929 destroyed him. On July 19, 1930, Harry Black took his own life. He was 67 years old. The man who built the Plaza died broken and bankrupt. The pattern connects builders and their creations throughout this story. Builders create monuments with vision and ambition. Subsequent owners extract value until the institution is gutted. The buildings outlast everyone. The Plaza story illuminates questions about American heritage. Who owns a landmark? What obligations come with that ownership? Can private property serve public purposes? The legal framework provides partial answers. Landmark designation protects physical features. Zoning regulates certain uses. Tenant protections defend some residents, but the law cannot mandate stewardship. It cannot require owners to love what they possess. The contrast between preservation success and institutional failure deserves recognition. The Palm Court ceiling survives. The Oak Room's paneling endures. The Grand Ballroom hosts events as it has for generations. These physical achievements matter. They represent victories won through decades of advocacy. Preservationists who fought for landmark designation accomplished something real. But physical preservation without cultural preservation produces museums rather than living institutions. The Plaza's protected spaces are beautiful. They are also increasingly disconnected from the building's original purpose. Tourists photograph the Palm Court without understanding what afternoon tea once meant. They admire the Oak Room without knowing the history those walls witnessed. The spaces survive as aesthetic experiences rather than social ones. The Plaza competes today against newer luxury hotels. Properties built in recent decades offer amenities impossible to retrofit into a 1907 structure. Contemporary travelers have different expectations. They want technology and convenience alongside beauty. The Plaza provides these things imperfectly. Its age is simultaneously an asset and a limitation. The hotel appears regularly in films and television. Production companies pay substantial fees to use the famous setting. The Plaza plays itself in romantic comedies and prestige dramas. Each appearance reinforces the brand even as the reality behind the brand continues changing. The image has become more durable than the institution. The broader question extends beyond the Plaza. American cities contain thousands of landmark buildings. Many face similar pressures. The tension between heritage preservation and economic development recurs everywhere. The Plaza story illustrates one outcome among many possible ones. The building survived. The institution didn't. Future ownership changes seem inevitable. The Plaza will trade hands again. New buyers will make promises. Some will invest significantly. Others will extract what they can. The carousel will continue spinning. Each rotation will bring new management philosophies. Some will prioritize heritage. Others will prioritize returns. The building will endure regardless. The chandeliers will keep burning. The marble will keep gleaming. Tourists will keep photographing themselves in the lobby. The Plaza will remain famous. The name will retain value. But what the Plaza means will continue evolving. The living institution that existed before 1988 is gone. What remains is a luxury hotel in a historic building. The distinction matters even if visitors don't notice. The Plaza's legacy is complicated. The building that Harry Black created in 1907 still stands magnificent at the corner of Fifth Avenue and Central Park South. The craftsmanship he specified remains visible in every detail. The landmark protections won through decades of advocacy preserved architectural heritage that might otherwise have been destroyed. These are real accomplishments worth celebrating. But the institution he created is dead. The staff culture developed across generations has been dissipated. The permanent residential community has been eliminated. The service traditions that distinguish the Plaza from competitors have been standardized into professional hospitality. What survives is beautiful and hollow. A monument without a soul, the Plaza endures. The names on the deed change every decade. The chandeliers keep burning. The building doesn't care who owns it. It just survives. More beautiful than the people who fight over it. More permanent than the fortunes made and lost inside its walls. That is the legacy of America's most famous hotel. Not the owners who came and went. Not the fortunes that rose and fell. The architecture remains. The stone and steel and crystal that Harry Black commissioned in 1905. The dreams that outlived the dreamers. The monument that survived everyone who tried to possess it.